Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. Sorry we've been kind of intermittent the last couple of weeks. Honestly, we just have not cared. Anyway, it is the off season, and luckily the NBA off season has a new episode. They released it. We weren't expecting it, Brian. It was just kind of a luck of the draw, but it's drama in Minnesota, so we're happy about that. I'm your host, Dre Alvarez. You can find me most places on the internet as Nerd Numbers, and with me, as always, is my producer, voice of God, man of many hats, Brian Foster. You can find on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. Say hey, Brian.
Yeah, what's going on, Dre? And yeah, we decided we didn't want to rehash everything the last few weeks, but we are back, and the NBA is back too. I believe the first preseason games start like Thursday or Friday this week, so we are days away from NBA action, Dre. I'm ready.
Well, you know, a bigger one to me is the Good Place comes back. And so a flippant tweet I made is this Thursday, instead of watching Thursday Night Football, you can just DVR The Good Place and watch that like 5 times. So that is my plan. I have been moderately interested in the NFL season just because I'm from Colorado and I live in Wisconsin. That's the Broncos and the Packers, and they're so huge. They're institutions in both places. You really can't not be interested. It's one of those, we're going to talk like weird stuff about sports and whatever later on the show. It's like one of those where you can accept that there is stuff wrong while also going, not being a part of this ostracizes me from communities. So the Packers, Aaron Rodgers is amazing, but I'm not expecting anything out of that team, and we'll see on the Broncos. So yeah. We've got like I said, we're going to talk the Timberwolves. We're going to talk the Mavericks and kind of what happened with Mark Cuban and the issues in their front office. And then I think a terrible mascot. And I think that's all I got, Brian. If you've got anything else, let me know. So
let's go.
To date ourselves, hopefully we'll see what happens. It's very possible that this is going to be old news by the time the show notes are out. I'm going to try and get the show up tomorrow, Brian, so at least it's not too out of date. In Minnesota, Jimmy Butler is apparently demanded out. In also, they signed Karl-Anthony Towns to a supermax. Then there's also a lot of speculations that Thibodeau might be on the hot seat because of this kerfuffle. And there's a lot to discuss. I actually, this is a funny story, Brian. I had an article ready to go today. It'll be out tomorrow, which is Tuesday the 25th. Yes, Tuesday the 25th. And I broke the site trying to publish it. Just a standard press, click send, goes up on the site. It crashed it. So I actually have to now recover that article and repost it. So that'll be up tomorrow. That was amusing. But it is all about the Timberwolves because I wanted to talk a lot of stuff there, particularly about how just insane the situation this is, and then also how par for the course it is for the Timberwolves. The first take I had, it'll be in the article, and then, obviously it's broken record time. You said we don't want to rehash stuff. The funny thing is, Brian, I legitimately could have taken an article Patrick wrote on Kawhi Leonard in San Antonio, crossed out Kawhi with Jimmy Butler, crossed out San Antonio Spurs with Minnesota Timberwolves, and republished the article. Because Patrick wrote an article earlier this summer before Kawhi left the Spurs called, Kawhi and leverage with the Spurs. And his basic premise is the Spurs hold all the cards. The Spurs hold his bird rights. The Spurs can say, if you sit for another season, that all you're going to do is hurt your open market value. The Spurs can just go, you play for us. You're a great player. You'll get us 10 to 20 wins. And that 10 to 20 wins, plus the ability to negotiate at the end of the season, is so much more valuable than anything they get back in return. And we're still in that boat, right? Despite the fact that we think DeMar DeRozan overpaid, but over average, that's a weird term, Brian, overpaid and above average DeMar DeRozan and Jakob Poeltl, who we think is actually a promising young player. Our take is probably 1 year of Kawhi plus, whatever Kawhi can do in the playoffs is probably worth more to that team, and those guys will be. And I've also seen some people note, well, if Minnesota loses Jimmy Butler, they traded all of these assets for only 1 year of Jimmy Butler. And again, to rehash another story, I can just cross out names and put in new names. When Andre Iguodala came to the Denver Nuggets, we got a franchise high in wins. We had our best bet to basically go forward in the playoffs before those bastard Golden State Warriors beat us. But the fact that we got, 10 to 20 wins out of Andre Iguodala and a good shot in the playoffs was worth more than, I believe it was, I can't believe I'm dropping his name. One was Al Harrington. The other was, I think it was Evan Fournier or another guard. It was a mediocre guard, an over-the-hill forward, and I think a pick. And all of that for one season of Andre Iguodala is worth it, in my opinion. So it always amuses me when people are like, can you believe the Timberwolves gave up all of these assets for 1 year of Jimmy Butler? And I looked at it and I was like, yeah, that was worth 1 year of Jimmy Butler. You actually made the playoffs for the first time in 14 years. He was actually pretty productive in the playoffs. You had your best bet. So it's like, it always is funny to me to see people argue that giving up assets for only 1 year, only a rental, same point with Kawhi to Toronto next year. If all they get is 1 year of Kawhi, it was worth it. So we're in the same boat where we actually think they have one more year on Jimmy Butler's contract. They have his bird rights, which means they can offer him the biggest deal, which is marginally better. I think 10 to 15% better, possibly 1 year more than any other team can offer him on the free market. Our take is the Minnesota Timberwolves would say, suck it up and play. We kind of hate that, right? We've always said that we kind of hate the paternalism in sports, the shut up and dance, shut up and play, shut up and do what you're told. We despise that, but we also acknowledge it's a trump card that teams have. And we, if we were the Timberwolves, that's what we would be doing.
Yeah, and it's good to make that distinction, right, between the correct business strategy or sports strategy, whatever, and how to treat people right. So I'm glad you made that distinction, but you're completely right. And we are going through some deja vu again. You remember back a few weeks ago, we were talking about what's going to be, Kawhi's fate and, what's going to happen with Toronto and all that. And it's coming true so far. So today is Monday the 24th. It's NBA Media Day. And Kawhi sat there next to, our boy Masai, saying all the right things. We're going to go for it and we're going to try to win in Toronto. And it's so far so good. It could still blow up, who knows, but things are looking a lot better than, when the trade was made.
You watched those clips, by the way?
Well, so let's be fair. The memes were all about how much of a robot Kawhi Leonard is, but I'm talking about the substance, though.
I love it. I love it so much. So the joke I made is I was like, I'm not sure Kawhi passes the Turing test. For those that don't know, talking AI and stuff, which we might talk more on the show. The Turing test is this idea of like
Allen Iverson could definitely pass the Turing test. Right?
Oh yeah,
sorry.
We're talking about the. All right, I don't. We'll have to see if I get that pun. But anyway, so basically, the Turing test idea is I sit in front of a monitor or computer or something that I can type like an instant message to something, and I talk to it and I try and ask it questions and it responds and I try and determine if it's real, if it's a human, or if it's a bot or a robot or artificial intelligent program. And it passes the Turing test if it can fool me into thinking it is a human. And so these are definitely fun. And like I said, Kawhi, I was like, I'm not sure if you passed that test with the answer he gave on press day, because he sounded very robotic. And then he had this really creepy laugh that has been getting made fun of. I've seen lots of good memes and, as you were saying, memes and tweets about it. But it's hilarious. But the other thing that always bugs me. There's so much stuff that always bugs me, Brian. I'm just in a perpetual state of annoyance.
Get off my lawn.
Yes, exactly. I've said that. If we rename this show, I'd call it the Get Off My Lawn podcast. But these players have been training for a very long time. It is ridiculous. I saw a fantastic tweet. I think it was Patrick H. Ruby or someone that said the worst basketball player in the NBA is better at basketball than the best person at anything in your life. Which, I mean, obviously you're going to have some jackass who's like, my best friend is Magnus Carlsen. What are you talking about? Or I was on the Olympic squad for blah. And you're like, congratulations. But for most, and this is true. I've known a lot of very successful people, a lot of very smart people. If you make the NBA, you are like the top, not even 1%, like 0.001%. I looked this up today. It's 4,267 people have played at least one NBA game in its entire history. That's back to the BAA.
Not very many people.
And so when I joined Google, I've used this example a lot, and it lets me tout that I was at Google at one point in a very Crash Davis role. I felt very Crash Davis-y, and then I was like, I made the show, and then I'm like, and I'm back in the minors. The lucky thing is, in sports, being in the minors versus the majors is this huge gap. You're on horrible buses and mistreated and underpaid, and the majors is huge. In the real world, like the majors is you're at this prestigious company, you work yourself to death to maybe get some stock options, and the minors is a company that pays almost as well and is much more enjoyable. Anyway, yes, I'm not bitter. But to that point, when I joined Google, it had 30,000 employees. And even if only half of them were software engineers, that means at the time I joined Google, there were 4 times as many active software engineers. And we've talked to Chris Ye about this before in his book, The Alliance, about, turnover in Silicon Valley, something you're, I'm sure, very familiar with, Brian. Like the average lifespan at a software firm is like a year. So ever in the NBA, 4,000 people. When I joined Google, and this was years ago at this point, right? It was over 5 years ago, so it's even more huge. Like 10 times as many people work at the most prestigious software firm in the world than have ever played the NBA. The NBA is the top of the top. And part of the reason is these people have been active for a very long time, right? They're going to high school basketball camps. They're playing in college. The Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours. By the time any player in the NBA makes the NBA, even one and done players, they have put thousands and thousands of hours into basketball. And so then when we're like, oh my God, why don't you know, we make fun of Kevin Durant. Why don't you know social media? We make fun of the other people that are like, oh, why aren't you charismatic? It's like, it's actually impressive that we get people like Magic Johnson and Michael Jordan who are charismatic, LeBron James, right? Good at talking, good at acting. When you're like, if I had devoted that much time to one activity and never really even got a college experience, for me to even be able to like talk to humans would be amazing. And the fact that we get mad at basketball players, like, why aren't you better at this? I'm like, why are you even able to do it at all? Because
we've both edited these shows before. Maybe we're not great at talking after all we found out, but I know what you're saying.
Well, I mean,
it's really hard to do all that stuff, right? It's amazing that LeBron can, do all this charity work, do all this NBA stuff, do all this business work. Like, it's remarkable.
I saw a really funny, I think it was Bill Hader, because he was talking about the train wreck. And he was talking about LeBron James with Seth. There are too many Seths, Brian. Who has the late night show? MacFarlane?
Seth Meyers. Seth MacFarlane is Family Guy.
Okay. Seth Meyers. And they were like talking about LeBron James. They're like, fuck that guy. He's too good. They were like, they're like, it's not fair. They're like, LeBron James has basketball. He's like, how is he allowed to be this good at comedy? Because, to that point, like Bill Hader and Seth Meyers, hours and hours and hours being really good at comedy. And I agree. So
here's a great one, Dre. So the coach of the now LA Rams, Shaun McVeigh, he's this young guy. He might even be, he's probably younger than me. I think he's closer to your age, like mid-30s. And he's the son of, a different McVeigh who is an NFL executive as well. It's like, oh, is this a gravy train or whatever? Well, famously, he had this interview recently where a reporter was asking him about random plays from games he'd coached like years ago. It's like, what happened in the fourth quarter on 3rd and 6 against such and such team? And the point is, he has a photographic memory. He remembers every single play that his team had ever. And maybe you're not impressed by this, but I mean, he's a really smart guy, is all I'm saying.
So I'm going to give the no, because the photographic memory, basically all the research kind of says that that's a myth and doesn't really exist. Now, what I do believe, and the research kind of backs this, is when you have domain expertise, you can be amazing at both analyzing and compartmentalizing that data. So I don't believe that this coach has a photographic memory. I think that's crap. But in the realm of football, he might be that good. I
love that you said that, because this makes my point even stronger, the fact that he can't rely on this crutch of the photographic memory. It's something else.
Yeah, well, to the point, like there was a LeBron James press conference where he did that, where they were asking him, and he was like,
yes,
able to run down the play. And the experiment they've done on this is like, you take chess players and you give them a board and you just like give them a few seconds to analyze it. And then you say, hey, can you recreate this board? And they're like, yeah. And they found a trick was, if they made an impossible board, as in a board that can never happen, they weren't able to recreate it, because the reason they are so good is they are able to look at a legal chessboard with a legal position and quickly encode it in their brain. But as soon as you take it even a little bit out of the domain of chess, it's now a memorization program, and they can't do that. And their memorization experience like that. There are mnemonic devices you can use to memorize long digits of numbers, but it's not really your memory is amazing. It's you are coming up with a domain that you can map that to, that you're able to memorize. So sorry if I was being like a little flippant. I'm like, I just, photographic memory is one of those terms I see thrown around a lot. I don't believe that, but I do believe, to what you're saying, this person has a domain specific enough ability to know all this stuff. And of the greats, right? I think, any sports player that is great, this would be any player in the NBA, you can probably do that with them, right? You can probably go up and say, what happened in that last play? And they're like, well, this guy was here and that guy was there and the refs were here and this was there and the clock was this and da-da-da-da. And you're like, holy cow, because to the exact point you're making, if you make that top level, if you're a college coach, you are probably pretty amazing at what you do.
So do you want to get into like the mechanics of the Minnesota situation at all?
What I did want to throw is a funny cautionary tale, because to rehash a lot of the stuff we've been throwing out. So we just talked leverage against stars and our take. And again, I still have not had time to write the story, and I don't actually care throwing it out. I don't mind if someone steals it, because if you steal it, I don't have to write it. But if you don't steal it, I will write it. And I have lots of stories on my back burner that, have never gotten written. But this one, Brian, has there ever been a trading of a Brian and Dre star? I mentioned this in the article, Brian. So Brian star, as we know, and again, as Brian is wont to do, so lots of precursors here, we did not originate these. These just are the tests that Brian and I routinely use on this show.
Yeah, so if we're talking about if someone's a star, I always say, well, what about their per minute? And then you will say, well, what about the total? Both really matter, right?
So the Brian star is 200 wins per 48, which is twice as good as an average NBA player. That's the Brian. And to what it's worth, you need a Brian star to make the finals. A team has not made the finals without a Brian star. My take is you want a Dre star, and that's 10 wins in an 82-game series. And the reason for that is you basically want to win at least 50 games. It's kind of like the metaphor I've started thinking about this, Brian, is a space shuttle. You know how the space shuttle works is you have this big thing full of gasoline that launches it, and then it basically disconnects. So that's the big thing that needs to launch it out of orbit, out of the Earth's atmosphere. That's the regular season, right? So you need a 10 wins gallon there. And then once it gets into orbit, you need a 200 wins per 48 player. Okay.
I like that analogy.
So the thought process being, has there ever been a player that fits that criteria that gets traded to another team and is still a star? Because that's important, right? There are players that we like that when they're traded, he died. I feel really bad that I'm dropping his name because he died, and he was a really famous Knicks player.
Which era are we talking about here?
We're talking like the 90s era when they were actually still good.
So in the 90s, there was the Nets, Drazen Petrovic might be the one you're thinking of.
It was definitely, and not died in the NBA, died recent.
Okay.
Anyway, but so the point being, has a player that's ever been that good been traded and still maintained that on another team, right? Still done another Brian and Dre star season. Has that ever been worth it in trade? Have they ever gotten even close to similar value back? And I argue it's no. So as an example, Shaquille O'Neal was left, or actually it was more of a free agency thing, but he was traded from LA to Miami. This was a case where they got a lot of good assets back, right? They got Karan Butler, Lamar Odom, I think some picks, right? And even then, it was the exact same point you're making about Jimmy Butler earlier, saying, well, that player that you traded, right, even the assets still weren't even worth one season, because Shaquille O'Neal had 2 really good years for Miami, and I'd argue Karan Butler and Lamar Odom weren't worth that. It just was not equal value back. You'd rather have a shot at a title. So on that note, trading a star, I don't think has ever paid off. I really want to look this up, but I don't think there's ever been a case where I'd say it's equal. And in fact, the Shaquille O'Neal might be the closest one, in my opinion, that actually almost hits the mark.
So, go ahead. Keep going.
Yeah, I'll let you finish, because that was an intro to another thought, but I'll let you follow up on that.
I was just going to say this situation makes me think of Chris Paul and the Clippers a little bit. And here's what I mean by that. So when Chris Paul got traded to the Rockets from the Clippers, the talent that came back to the Clippers was not equal at all, right? So in a vacuum, it was a very one-sided trade. However, in the end, what I ended up saying, and I think you and Patrick did as well, is, well, they had no leverage. He was just going to leave as a free agent. So they got what they could kind of at the time, right? What they should have done is somehow had a time machine and gone back into the past and chosen Chris Paul over Doc Rivers or whatever and made a better relationship, right? But at the point where they were, the relationship had deteriorated. They had no leverage. Oh, no, you're getting off board. That's okay. I'll finish up, though. So with Jimmy Butler, it seems like he got into this. Well, okay, let's go to this Coach Nick interview. So I listened to Coach Nick's the B-Ball Breakdown podcast. I think it came out yesterday. Things have developed a little bit, but I think this mostly stands. Is he interviewed with I think it was Darren Wolfson, who's a insider for the Wolves. Oh, he must not be for the Wolves. That'd be way too coincidental if his name had Wolf in it. But anyway, he had detailed knowledge of the situation here with the Coach Nick, and what he basically said was there were like 2 factions on the Wolves. There's the Towns, Butler and Thibodeau are on the same team. Then no one really is super close with Thibodeau, but Butler was the closest out of any of the players on the team. And they were the old school, hard asses. And Butler loves that, right? He loves that Thibodeau yells at everyone. But Wolfson said basically Towns is a millennial, and Butler and Thibodeau don't know how to talk to millennials. And they basically scuttled the relationship with Towns. And they didn't say this on the show, but maybe you can throw Wiggins in there too on the Towns side, because Wiggins' brother was happy on social media when, Butler announced he was going to be traded. So I don't know. Maybe that's the situation that happened. Maybe it wasn't. I'm not sure. And then you have like Thibodeau and then Taylor kind of sending out mixed signals too. Like one saying we're going to trade him and when we're not. So it seems like one of those organizational situations where, right, they didn't secure the Towns-Butler relationship, and it got to the point where I guess they refused to play together. And you do, I think, pick Towns over Butler. He's younger. He's a more important position. And if Butler says, get rid of Towns or get rid of me, you're like, yep, you max out Towns like they just did, right? Of course, they're stupid for getting into that situation to begin with.
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, the other point that is different than other real world situations is that because of all of the effed up rules that we routinely rail against, they can just tell Butler, okay, your options are as follows. You're on a contract year. You can play. Yeah. At the end of the year, we'll negotiate. We'll approach you with an offer. You can decide what to do then. Or you can choose to sit out the season and see what you're going to do. And like the closest I've ever seen that, I will give the Spurs a lot of credit, kind of. That's like the closest I've ever seen one of these situations where a team's ever done that, where I'm actually kind of amused, where, usually this happens, a player demands out and the team acquiesces. I'm arguing you shouldn't. You just look them in the face and say that. Now, it also does amuse me in professional sports, just to say what you're noting, how often these just tiny little, maybe it is a big deal, but I'm saying seems relatively tiny to us, can explode a good team. And, that happened to like Shaq and Penny. That happened with Kobe and Shaq. It is interesting in sports to notice how often just like the biggest hurdle to overcome isn't lucking into a star. It's personal relationships. I will say it's an interesting part about sports. So many tangents, Brian. But you look at Jimmy Butler, right? Jimmy Butler's almost 30. You got Karl-Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins, who are college-age students. And, Karl-Anthony Towns, I think he plays, Fortnite or what that island game?
He streams a few different games, I think. I haven't been watching him lately, but yeah.
Yeah, Karl-Anthony Towns. And I could see an older player being like, these young kids, these millennials, and millennial doesn't mean a damn thing. But
yeah, Butler's a millennial himself, I think. So Wolfson is wrong with his terminology.
But all I'm saying is it is interesting to note in professional sports that you basically have adults and their livelihood is playing with like a kid that annoys them. And I can see Butler saying, they don't take it seriously enough or whatever, very Bull Durham, Crash Davis-like.
No, Dre, there was a news story that, I don't know if it was Butler or someone else, but someone on the Wolves was like, Towns, why are you streaming right now? We have a game the next day.
Yeah, and I mean, it is a hard one. I don't know what to say or what the right attitude, but I will just say, I'd be interested if you could find that date to see the number, to see the day, because I'd be curious if there is any data on how late Karl-Anthony Towns stays up playing video games and how well.
That would be funny.
But he's amazing. I mean, that to your point, like Towns versus Butler is a very easy decision, and we love Butler. We're Team Butler. So, but anyway, the whole point about the Wolves, like the 20 tangents I got off on to get to this point, is that there's a cautionary tale about winning the draft, and that is this point that Patrick's brought up forever called the sunk cost fallacy, which is everybody has this belief of if you're a bad team, you need to blow it up, get a top draft pick, and that's how you rebuild. And what people miss out, the asymmetric side, right? There's a bell curve. There are two sides of this. One side is you luck into a Ben Simmons and you become great. The other side is you get an Andrea Bargnani or an Andrew Wiggins, and you can't give up on them because you invested so many years of bad play and so much money and, so much time that teams just seem incapable of giving up. And so it is an interesting one. The Wolves are almost, like I said, a cautionary tale of people not realizing sometimes things they think are good are bad. This was a point in Malcolm Gladwell's most recent book, I think Underdogs or whatever, or David and Goliath, which is about underdogs, where he was talking about these horseshoe-like problems. The example he uses in the book is class size. So if you think of a class size, people think, oh man, this class is too big. We want smaller class sizes to be better teaching. And he's kind of right. But you get a class size that's too small, and suddenly you lose out on the camaraderie and other things that actually make classroom learning beneficial. And so I would argue that draft picks, people miss out on it. There is the high upside young good player you get that plays well for your team. There's a majority of them that turn into serviceable NBA players with reasonable careers. Ironically enough, in looking this up, Kwame Brown counts. Kwame Brown was not, in my opinion, Kwame Brown was not a draft bust. He turned into an above average NBA player. He actually had a few decent seasons. He just was never, basically got injured kind of the middle of his career and was never able to kind of return. I don't think you can reasonably call Kwame Brown a draft bust, whereas, Andre Bargnani, Andrew Wiggins, depending on how he ends up, are draft busts and that they never turned into anything, and then they're cautionary tales. So I think the Timberwolves are fascinating in that when we hear this myth of you have to blow it up to get better, I go, this team did that. And what you also have to realize is that there are other strings attached with that scenario that people forget about, namely, people not getting along. You luck into a bunch of draft picks, but maybe they all hate each other. Or you luck into a draft pick that you think is great, but they're bad. And then you either have to get rid of them gracefully or give them the money. And most teams are horrible at it. So the Wolves were fascinating for it. And this kind of off season going on right now is very telling in that it's kind of sad that they finally got back to the playoffs, Brian, but they're out again. And we're just here to talk the drama.
Yeah, and my last thing on this is you were making the point a couple minutes ago that it's not a perfect analogy to the Clippers, right? It has a little bit of Spurs Leonard involved too, because you're right, the Timberwolves do have a lot more leverage than the Clippers, right? So even though they've apparently destroyed this relationship, they still can just make him play this year out, and if they want to, and that's probably the best decision they could make, because if you're looking at some of these offers, these rumors from, the Nets or the Clippers, ironically, apparently Butler wants to go to the Clippers, or the Heat have been getting on in the action today. There's just no way they're going to be able to offer them anything anywhere near his value, right? They're going to be much better off just letting him play out the season and, see where it goes, I think, at least right now. Maybe we'll see some other trade offers that are more legitimate, but as of today, I think they should hold on to him.
So I would say I'd probably do Hassan Whiteside for Karl-Anthony Towns.
I would do that so fast. That would be a great trade.
Butler for Hassan Whiteside, I would probably do. But
that would be the best for us as fans, right?
Yeah, I would love to see Miami get I don't know. That's interesting.
But here's some quotes, Dre, from that podcast. Darren Wolfson and Coach Nick. He said that he's positive that the reason he wants to leave is over 50% on-court reasons. He wasn't sure if it's 95%, but that's most of the reason, is just not agreeing with the style they want to play.
But then he likes Thibodeau, so that doesn't really.
Well, no, it's just it's playing with Towns and Wiggins, basically, right? That's what he's getting at, I think. And then Coach Nick added that Thibodeau is grating and constantly bellowing and grinding are the words he used. It works for Jimmy, but not the younger players. And of course, Coach Nick is he's interviewed people with the Positive Coaching Alliance and all that before. He's a very new school kind of guy. We've talked about this before. And his point is a nice coach, a player's coach, will still have a hard ass like Jimmy Butler playing really hard. Like Jimmy Butler's going to play hard no matter who his coach is, right? So then why grind down these other players that aren't? And Darren had another quote. He said, "You can hear Tibbs calling Towns a mother bleeping on the sideline in multiple games on national TV." If I'm Towns, I'm like, who is this guy? Like, even if you're not mad about it, like, even if you're just able to let it roll off your back, you're like, who is this guy? He's going to lead us to the promised land, because the players that come into the league are just going to be younger and younger than Towns. So, yeah, if I'm the ownership, I'm just like, Thibodeau and Butler, well, especially Thibodeau, maybe your time has passed. I don't know.
I'm going to go off on this tangent, Brian. I'm so glad you gave us an opportunity to talk this. So huge shout outs to Coach Nick. If you don't follow B-Ball Breakdown on Twitter, what are you doing here? Like, I don't understand how you got here. This is like an Amazon thing where I'm like, if you like this, you like that. And I'm actually going the other way. Amazon's like, if you were buying like a filter for a fish tank, and they're like, if Amazon could say, you don't have a fish tank, because in the very near future, Amazon's going to know everything about you. They'll go, why are you buying a fish tank filter? You don't have a fish tank. You don't have a friend with a fish tank, right? I've heard the other alternative, which is like, Amazon's going to help identify murderers, because they'll start ordering stuff and they're like, oh, you're ordering like, duct tape and rope. Obviously, you're planning this. You might also like these chemicals. So anyway, If you're here and you don't follow B-Bell Breakdown, I don't understand.
You're basically a murderer.
Yeah.
If
Brian,
you don't follow Coach Nick, no, sorry. I got that backwards, didn't I?
okay, but to that point, Coach Nick has been very vehement on Twitter, and I've loved it. The connection I have to this, so Coach Nick has been very vehement about like positive coaching and not needing to do the hard ass stuff that we all associate with coaching. If you think about this, like the Miracle on Ice movie, the Kurt Russell one, where he gets so angry at them for not doing well in an exhibition game, he makes them do suicides, whatever they're called, right? Burpees. You go a little back, middle court back. 3/4 of the court.
That's suicide.
All of us know this drill if we've done any basketball in our life at all.
Burpees are like jumping and push-ups at the same time. That's like a military thing.
All right. So, but him saying doing that drill, if you miss a free throw and having people do that because they miss free throws, like that, what does that do? And I've seen him and Travis Heath Travis Heath, another great name to follow on Twitter if you don't, for basketball stuff, who actually did, I believe, some coaching with the Minnesota Timberwolves, and he's a psychologist. I have loved their takes on this, and the association I have with this is my wife is a teacher. And the thinking of there's this old school belief kind of that you're noting of you've got to be a hard ass, you don't let anything by, you very much, if someone does something, you smack them down. And the new school approach, which is just like positive reinforcement is better. And what gets interesting is that the data basically backs this, right? Yep. The idea that punishment is a good methodology for getting people to do what you want or even become well-developed people. Like all of data says spanking kids is bad. Like there's no, the people, we were talking like the weird millennial trope, right? The people that are like, millennials these days are soft. Back in my day, I got spanked and I don't have a problem spanking kids. And the very easy response is you raise your hand and you're like, you think it's okay to abuse kids, so I'm actually going to argue maybe spanking didn't raise you to have the right morals. Anyway, yeah, all the data basically says, that this hard-ass approach that we have associated with the right way to teach or the right way to coach, a lot of the data that's been coming out says, no, positive reinforcement works a lot better. We're huge fans of Art Rondeau around here. I've talked to him a lot about coaching, and a lot of his coaching about how to get people to do right is getting yourself in the right mental zone. And so obviously, if you've got people worried, he's even argued pulling people for bad performance is not good, because if people are worried about getting pulled for bad performance instead of getting, I think the term was flow. There was like a popular pop sci book about how to get the right way to work. And it's like when everything is just the flow zone, like if you want people to flow, they can't be worried about this stuff. So like you're saying, Coach Nick, Travis Heath, I've loved it. And it really bugs me that the old school mentality is, well, you've got to be hard on them. And so I think you're right, where Karl-Anthony Towns and younger players starting to fight back. One of my favorite examples of this, Brian, is Bo Jackson. I remember Bo Jackson was talking about having an attitude in college of coaches barking at him about like no drinking any water or whatever. And he's like, you know what? You weren't just out on the field playing hard. How the hell are you going to tell me not to drink water? What the hell? I'm the one playing. So it's funny where you have older people that are like, these young people are soft. But you also have the data that says if you want people to do what you want and do it effectively, there are better methods, this positive coaching. And like I said, Coach Nick has been really high in it. And I've loved Coach Nick a ton because he is what I kind of hoped the advanced analytics movement would be. He's doing it for coaching, where he's saying these old methods we thought were the correct way are wrong. And we have to update our thinking. A lot of coaches are doing drills that are incorrect. I think you made this point. You quoted to me a Nylon Calculus piece about this, Brian, about Jason Kidd. And the point was, Jason Kidd actually was really effective at getting his team to run a defense. But it was a bad defense, which means the over is you have to update your thinking. Yes, you're training these people on this defense you really like, but you actually have to throw it out and go the new way. And so I agree with coaching. And so when it comes down to Towns versus Thibodeau or Butler, the very easy answer is Towns. I would say, though, toss Thibodeau, tell Jimmy Butler he can, suit up and play, and keep Towns. So at least they've done that.
And ironically, Dre, the reason Thibodeau became a famous coach and renowned in the first place and got all these jobs is that he's one of the innovators of this new switching style of defense that's really effective. So tactically, he's, strategically, he's sound, or at least he was a few years ago. I don't know if he's stayed up with things, but as a manager, which is the most important thing for a coach, he doesn't get there. So, hire Ron Adams or someone else to do your switching defense.
Well, it's funny. I mean, I remember you noted that when I was talking about how like Patrick and I probably wouldn't ever want a front office job or to be a GM, and you actually agreed, and you kind of agreed. Like,
I think I was mean to begin with. I said I would not hire you guys. Sorry, I said I would hire you to be team president instead of GM.
Well, exactly. But the point being, a lot of times we have like coaches or GMs or people that are hired. It's like the Peter principle is what it's called, where you hire someone above their level of competency. But it's like, you can get other people to do this other stuff, right? Thibodeau can be a great tactician. I think football's more known for this, right? Like you might have a head coach and an offensive coordinator. You're kind of arguing that. Like Thibodeau might be a great defensive coordinator, but he shouldn't be the guy on the sideline saying who gets in and out.
That's a great way to look at it.
By the way, last tangent on this point that I did put in the article, a lot of behind-the-scenes drama. You shed a lot of light. So actually, I'm kind of mad at you, Brian, because I don't really want to rewrite anything in this article I've already written.
Oh.
But quick bullet point about drama, and you've just shed a lot of light on the drama that I was talking about. Another interesting thing I just brought up is obviously all of us are following Wojnarowski on this. And I just said something smacked a lot of a Kevin Draper piece where Kevin Draper noted that Wojnarowski basically exchanges in exchange for access, he gives publicity. And actually, this is really common in sports reporting. Essentially, the team says, hey, we'd really like to say this. We're not allowed to, right? The Lakers, as an example, the Lakers are not allowed to say we want Paul George. Remember, Magic Johnson got fined for going on the Tonight Show and saying we'd really like Paul George on the squad. So sometimes what they'll do is they'll go to a beat reporter and say, we'd really like you to say people in the front office say we're interested in Paul George because we want you to give a message to Paul George, but we don't want to get in trouble. And the Wojnarowski thing was he would give favorable reports to teams like the Detroit Pistons in exchange for access. So he would be the person who would be the quickest with being able to say, Woj bomb, this trade just went down. But the reason he was getting that access is because he was basically planting stories those teams wanted. There was a piece released where he said only four teams are in serious talks for Jimmy Butler. But I think Jimmy Butler gave a list. So I'm saying that to me just smacks a little the same of going, I don't buy that every team in the NBA is not interested in Jimmy Butler right now. So it is interesting that Woj is saying there are only four when he might have an ulterior motive for that.
Yeah, that's true. And you know what this is making me think of is the NBA draft this year where he had just, Wojnarowski that is, had just moved to ESPN. And so the league or whoever said, okay, this year we're not going to spoil the draft. All the reporters are going to wait until we call out the pick, right? But then he got around it by a few minutes for every pick saying, Team X has, thoughts and interest about player Y. And it was totally bogus, right? He totally circumvented the system. So I don't know if there's a fallout from that at all, but yeah, that kind of stuff gets ridiculous.
And as we've noted, it's just stupid. It's basically it's fake, right? It's a fake currency to pretend that getting news a little faster, like the metaphor I've used, he's a high frequency trader in areas where the other channels just aren't allowed to give information that quickly, whatever. I think that's all I've got on the Wolves, Brian. If you don't, we can wade into the uncomfortable topic of the Dallas Mavericks and two guys talking about sexism in the workplace. So neither of us has watched this, but there was apparently a fantastic Rachel Nichols interview with Mark Cuban, 30 minutes. So you said you've watched 5-minute clips. And so just kind of a recap, fill in any gaps, Brian. I'm forgetting the guy's name that was a higher up at the Mavericks. Apparently there was – actually, I'll let you do it. How about that, Brian, because you're more up to date. So you recap and then I'll give the opinion if that's fair. So you give the news. You don't have to say any opinion. I'll give the opinion. You can stay silent. That's how you said you were comfortable with it.
Yeah, so I guess the way I'd say it is I'm still not really sure what happened, but here's kind of how I'm working through it right now. So, so this full report came out, and I haven't read this either. I'm sure it's very long, but I'm just kind of seeing, what came out of it. So, and yeah, I've watched a few 5-minute clips, and what Nichols is saying basically is that, well, so first of all, like you said, she's getting a lot of credit for this interview.
But the full story is higher up in the Dallas Mavericks organization did lots of inappropriate things.
Okay, we'll do that part first. Sure. Yeah. So say that right after this. Anyway, yeah. So what the report seems to have found is that Mark Cuban knew about some of these incidents and alleged incidents, but not all of them and not the big ones, and mainly the big ones perpetrated by the former business leader of the Mavericks, Turdima Ussery. And what Cuban is saying basically is that he was an executive that was in place when he bought the team from Ross Perot, and he just kind of left him in place and didn't look up on him. And all this stuff happened, and Cuban didn't know about it. And according to Nichols in this interview, the report basically not vindicates him, but says that he didn't know about most of this stuff. And then, as you were saying before the show, at the same time, he has come out and has at least publicly been very, apologetic and saying, even though I didn't know about this stuff, I should have known about it and I should have done better. And that's kind of the taste I'm coming away with is, yeah, you should have known. So I guess we're just going to kind of move on from this. Mark Cuban's not getting suspended. Adam Silver said the reason is that the report showed that he didn't know about the most egregious stuff. And that's where we are today. We're just Mark Cuban screwed up and we're going to move on. Well,
again, he had essentially a $10 million fine.
That's true. He's donating it to charity, yeah.
What does irk me slightly about this, and I know Jeff Bezos is in a similar situation, I get very upset when you essentially have millionaires and billionaires that are able to circumvent things like taxes, and then they give a donation and they act as if it's a gift, and you kind of can go, look if you're going to the metaphor I've used in my head for this is pretend you had a roommate that like didn't pay rent for 3 months and then bought the house a free Xbox and is like, aren't I a nice guy? I bought you an Xbox. And you go, yeah, that's nice. We'd rather have the 3 months of rent. Like, you're not a good person for doing this. So I don't like, I saw some people annoyed at that where they were saying basically he agreed with the NBA front office about the fine amount and it's being PR spun as a donation. And I'm not okay with that. But also this is going to sound weird. I don't like that. But in the same place, I understand why if you were the Mavericks front office, you would do that. Why wouldn't you take the PR spin if you're allowed to? We say that a lot on the show, which is even if we don't like the way a player behaves, we don't like Donovan Mitchell hucking up 1 billion shots a game, we understand the incentive to do so. So, yeah.
So to be fair, I think this is being called a non-voluntary thing. It's being called a fine. Like a fine that goes to charity, basically.
Yeah.
And that seems a little bit better, right? Like, why is the league pocketing money when a player gets too many technicals?
Well, I'm just saying, when it was initially reported as Mark Cuban agrees to donate, blah, you're like, don't call it a donation. But that's a PR spin. But yeah. that's ticky-tacky. What I will say is, we can agree easily, and this is all the reporting, by the way, huge shout-outs to both Jessica Luther and Rachel Nichols for their, Jessica Luther for her amazing reporting, Rachel Nichols for her great interviewing on this subject. So let's just give that out. We can agree that the atmosphere and treatment in the Mavericks workplace was completely unacceptable. We're not even going to defend that. There's nowhere here. I get so fucking pissed of people when things like this come up, when like Chris Hardwick, because he's Ansari, getting hot water, and people try and defend and say they didn't do anything wrong. Even this take where you're saying Mark Cuban's not getting suspended because there's enough showing. I mean, I'm content to basically say the league said, you messed up and here's what we've agreed on. We can raise our hands and fight over if 10 million is acceptable. I've seen lots of people point out to a billionaire that's not very much. I agree. I mean, also you can get into the annoying system of that's just the world we live in where, you and I get the same parking ticket as a billionaire. So that means like if I think I've heard this. I'm not 100% sure if it's Bill Gates. There's a billionaire that has like some not street legal cars that just parks them illegally, and they go, I don't care. Like you can give me a $200 parking ticket. That's nothing to me. That's the same as if if like this happened to me actually, Brian. This is a really stupid story. I'm going to be. This is so light in comparison to the big story around. I moved to Appleton, Wisconsin from Denver, Colorado. Denver, Colorado isn't even a super big city, but it's getting there. So in Denver, Colorado, if you got like a parking ticket, it's going to be for like $50. I lived in Appleton. I had a parking meter for an appointment. It was like $1 for an hour, or actually it's $1 for an hour and a half. So $1 for an hour and a half, but I went long, came back. There's a ticket on my car. I was like, damn it. I picked up the ticket. It was for $5. And I was like, okay, whatever. So, I mean, that's kind of the millionaire scenario here, right? This fine might not mean anything to Cuban. We might have quibbles about if he was appropriately reprimanded, but those are all fair. But where we're going to take a step back and say, and I've seen some stories say that a lot of people are moving on from this, is that at least one thing that we can say we wish would be more common is at least the fact that Mark Cuban and the Mavericks organization is coming forward and saying this isn't okay and we messed up. And the comparison I was giving you pre-show, Brian, is recently, in light of the Me Too movement, Dan Harmon had an example happen wherein a former employee of Dan Harmon's, I believe Megan Gantz is her name, I think, who used to work with him on Community. Essentially, there was a hostile work environment where Dan Harmon sexually harassed her, basically had an inappropriate workplace crush on her, kept making advances on her. She rebuked them and even said, "This is an uncomfortable work environment for me because I'm not sure if you are giving me credit for my work being good because it's good or because you like me." And then after she rebuked his advances enough, he started being extra hard on her in the workplace to say, "Well, you say you don't want me to give you preferential treatment because I like you. I'm going to treat you like crap." And what ended up happening is Dan Harmon actually came out and apologized and said, "I messed up. Here's what I did wrong. Here's how easy it is to happen. I'm sorry I did this." Now, very similar to the Mark Cuban Mavericks situation, we can get into a discussion of, is that a sufficient enough penalty? Did Dan Harmon do enough? And I'm not a judge. I'm not here to say that. But what does frustrate me in these scenarios, like I brought up Chris Hardwick and Aziz Ansari very deliberately, where you have these people that come out with a story that is, this person mistreated me. And it is very tempting. I see the stupid battle lines being drawn on social media of people saying they didn't do anything wrong. This person's lying. They're trying to destroy their career. And what it seems like a lot of times people just want is an acknowledgement that someone did something wrong. I'm not even saying that's enough, but I'm saying in this scenario, I'm at least encouraged that that is a start. So this comes up a lot on the show, Brian, because we admit that the world is effed up and a lot of stuff is messed up. And we can even say we are not happy with where things are, but we can give that, brief glimmer of optimism when we're saying we're happy about the direction it's going. And so at least in this case, that's what we're saying about the Mavericks. There's lots of stuff to still be upset about, and we don't have any fault with any of it. But we are, at least I am, Brian, I won't speak for you, I'm at least slightly encouraged that we are seeing people acknowledge inappropriate behavior and the belief that maybe this behavior will not be appropriate in the future. Of course, that's basketball, unlike the real world where it matters, not the Supreme Court, but is what it is.
Yeah, and that's the big difference here, right, is that everyone involved in this Kavanaugh situation, on the Kavanaugh side anyway, they appear to be just completely bad faith actors, right? Based on this report about the Mavericks, it seems like for now that we think Mark Cuban is a good faith actor, that he screwed up, he took responsibility, and he wants to move forward. So, yeah, I agree. If someone wants to improve and work with you in good faith, and that's really true, then yeah, go for it. So I hope that's true here. What I was telling you before the show is it seems like he just didn't take it seriously enough to dig into it, right? He saw a few things, but then he was, I imagine him, sitting there with his executives, and here's this big board of Mavericks projects, and they've got like 50 projects on there, and they're just like, maybe we can't put enough time into this, right? Like, things like this, even though they're so important to the individual people involved, when you're this big CEO, it doesn't quite get up to your level. That's just the sad, part of the way business works in America sometimes. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very there's not a happy ending to this story. I don't want to give the take that we are okay with this. It's very feels. I've been watching a lot of The Good Wife. I just binged through the whole show. And when you talk court, a lot of times in court, you're like, this is what you want. This is what you'll settle for. It's in some cases a moral victory and not even that. And I think that's what this is. And our only, like I said, my only take on it is I at least hope this is a precedent for improvement in professional sports for treating women and who's allowed to be an exec, et cetera. So is what it is. How about we follow that up with the most flippantly silly response, Brian? Just utterly horrible programming on my part. Do you want to just show we'll end on this unless you've got another topic. The Philadelphia Flyers, their new mascot. Do you understand this, Brian? Like, is there not a good school for mascot design? Because it seems to me like if you remember like the Pelicans mascot, their first mascot, or that giant baby, I don't understand so many of these mascots are just built from nightmares, and I don't get it. But yeah, that's all I got.
Yeah, I don't know. I can recommend. I'm trying to load up the mascot here. Here we go. Gritty, the Flyers' new mascot. Yeah, I don't know a lot about this story. I can say though that a great local podcast here that's really big nationally now, 99% Invisible. They have a great one from not too long ago about the 90s NBA uniforms and how we got that crazy purple Barney Raptors uniform we've talked about in this show before, and the crazy Phoenix Suns uniform and some of the other ones. So if you want to know about NBA design, that would be a good podcast to check out.
All right. Oh, this is even better, Brian. I didn't realize this happened 2 hours ago, but the new mascot fell over in the first game. Yeah, I got nothing. This is just
he doesn't know how to skate. That should be part of his lore.
All right. So anyway, that's been our show. If you found us not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. I've been your host, Ray Alvarez. You can find me on Twitter as Nerd Numbers. With me, as always, Brian Foster. You can find on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. With us in spirit, Patrick Minton. You can find on Twitter as NBA Geek. Let's see what iTunes, Stitcher, the Boxscore Geek Show, twitch.tv/Nerd Numbers. Usually 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I think Mondays, Brian, we're trying for it. We'll see. We have not been consistent all summer. And you can catch the recaps on YouTube channel Nerd Numbers. Did I miss anything, Brian? Leave anything out?
Sounds good.
All right. We'll see you next week when there's real basketball to discuss. Preseason, which we agree means so much.
I'm going to have a lot to say.
All right. Sounds good.